I have overseen hundreds of estates in my career, some straightforward, some fraught with complexity, but nothing had prepared me for the Harper family or the will I was about to uncover. The house itself spoke of decades of secrets. A grand Victorian perched above the cliffs of the small coastal town, fog curling through its weathered towers, creaking floorboards whispering long-forgotten stories. I had been called not merely to read a will, but to navigate a legacy steeped in mystery, delay, and perhaps betrayal. Inside, the air was thick with anticipation, tension pressing down the moment I stepped into the drawing room. There were 4 of them. Jonathan Harper, eldest son, seated like a general surveying a battlefield, mask of composure barely concealing something darker. Clara Harper, the only daughter, fingers twisting in nervous rhythm, eyes darting to her siblings as though measuring their thoughts. Thomas Harper, the youngest, leaning casually, an air of indifference that belied his sharp awareness. Martha, the long-serving housekeeper and confidant to the late patriarch, standing slightly apart, her gaze quietly assessing everyone. I greeted them with a calm I hoped masked my own curiosity. Good morning. I am Gabriel Ward, the executor of Mr. Edmund Harper's estate. Today, we will review a will that was discovered long after it should have been executed. Please hold all questions until the reading is complete. Their faces flickered, betraying shock, suspicion, and a hint of fear. None of them had expected this. A document lost to time, suddenly capable of rewriting their understanding of family and inheritance. I retrieved the envelope from my briefcase. It was thick, old, and unmistakably authentic. The patriarch's meticulous handwriting addressed it to me personally. A wax seal preserved its mystery. As I slid it open and unfolded the contents, I felt the first chill of anticipation run down my spine. The will was unlike any I had read. The initial pages seemed ordinary, declarations, witness statements, legal formalities. But as I read further, I realized the stakes were far higher. The estate was no longer merely about wealth or property. It was about justice, about the consequences of decades of neglect, secrecy, and moral compromise. Then I came across a note tucked inside, addressed solely to me. If you are reading this, the family has waited too long. The consequences of past inaction are now yours to navigate. Choose wisely, for the inheritance carries more than property. It carries truth. My hands tightened on the papers. This was no ordinary reading. I could feel the weight of history, of lives shaped and constrained by decisions made long ago. I glanced at the family. Jonathan's jaw was tight. Clara's hands shook slightly. Thomas shifted uneasily. And Martha. Martha's expression was unreadable, but I knew she understood the gravity of what I held. This was not just a will. It was a test, a reckoning. And I, Gabriel Ward, was now its steward. The morning after the will reading, I arrived at the Harper estate before sunrise. The coastal fog lingered, curling around the Victorian towers like a shroud, hiding the town below. The house was silent, save for the distant crash of waves and the occasional creak of the floorboards. Inside, the weight of yesterday's revelations pressed on me like a living thing. I laid out the will, the supplementary letters, and photographs across the oak desk. Each document carried a fragment of the truth, fragments that, when pieced together, painted a picture of betrayal, greed, and carefully concealed manipulations. My experience had taught me to trust the instincts that prickled at the back of my neck. An instinct told me that this family's secrets ran deeper than anyone could imagine. I began with the letters. Each one was written with precision, almost clinical, but the subtext was unmistakable. Instructions buried in these letters altered inheritance allocations in subtle ways, favoring certain heirs over others. Some of these allocations contradicted the family's current understanding of their father's intentions. The implications were staggering. Jonathan Harper had long been assumed the primary heir. He carried himself with the authority of someone accustomed to command, but his subtle reactions betrayed him. A slight stiffening when his mother's legacy was mentioned, a twitch of the eye when the youngest sibling's portion was revealed. Clara Harper, usually composed, now fidgeted with her ring, her knuckles white. Thomas leaned back in his chair, trying to appear indifferent, but even his casual smirk faltered under my gaze. The most important revelation, however, lay in the folder labeled Confidential Instructions. Here, The late Edmund Harper had outlined not just monetary inheritances, but moral conditions. Certain bequests were contingent upon honesty, reconciliation, and acknowledgement of past mistakes. Other inheritances were deliberately delayed, to be executed only if the family demonstrated ethical awareness, a delayed reckoning that now fell squarely on my shoulders. I knew I had to act carefully. The wrong word could ignite fury, suspicion, or even legal challenges, but neutrality was impossible. The will, by its very design, demanded accountability. Some family members would benefit only if others confronted uncomfortable truths. I arranged a private meeting with Martha, the housekeeper who had served the Harper family for decades. She knew the intricacies of the household, its histories, its quiet resentments, and its untold betrayals. When I handed her the documents, her hands trembled slightly, betraying a mixture of anticipation and dread. "Gabriel," she said softly, "this is what I feared. He didn't just leave a will, he left a moral test." "Yes," I replied, "and it's my responsibility to enforce it. The family will have to confront truths they've avoided for years, betrayals, omissions, and lies that have shaped their inheritance. Some may be willing, some will resist, some may never accept it." The confrontation began that afternoon. I called Jonathan and Clara into my office, separating them from Thomas to prevent alliances from forming too quickly. I placed the original will, the letters, and the photographs on the desk, letting the documents speak for themselves. "This," I said calmly, "is the complete documentation as prepared by your father. Certain aspects have been withheld until now, deliberately delayed to ensure accountability. You must read them carefully and consider the implications." Jonathan's posture shifted imperceptibly. "Gabriel, are you suggesting that my inheritance isn't guaranteed?" His voice carried a mixture of indignation and disbelief. I met his gaze steadily. "It is contingent, Jonathan, not on legality alone, but on truth, acknowledgement, and ethical behavior. Your father's intent is clear. The estate should benefit those who are honest about the past and willing to reconcile with the family." Clara's hands shook as she leafed through the letters. This changes everything," she whispered. "All these years, we thought we understood. We were wrong." Jonathan's face darkened. "You're overcomplicating it. The estate should be distributed as it always has been." "But it won't be," I said firmly. "Not according to your father's final instructions. The consequences of past inaction, neglect, secrecy, and dishonesty are now unavoidable." The tension in the room was almost tangible. Each word I spoke seemed to thrum through the air, forcing reflection. Jonathan attempted to assert authority, but subtle signs of guilt betrayed him. A tightening jaw, a flash of unease, a hand gripping the edge of the desk. Clara's quiet realization contrasted sharply with her brother's arrogance. Her willingness to face the past mirrored the moral framework set by their father. Over the next hours, I guided them through the documents, revealing the implications of each condition. Certain properties were to be transferred only if they admitted past mistakes. Specific monetary distributions were contingent on reconciliation among siblings. The delayed will was not merely an artifact of oversight. It was a tool for justice, carefully constructed to ensure accountability. By late afternoon, the room was heavy with emotion. Jonathan's defenses faltered as the evidence mounted. Letters documenting his father's expectations, photographs showing overlooked bequests, and notes indicating moral contingencies. Clara began to cry softly, acknowledging the years of neglect and misunderstanding. Thomas, when confronted separately, admitted a level of detachment that had inadvertently harmed family unity, showing he, too, could be part of the resolution. The turning point came when I presented the final moral stipulation, a binding clause requiring that all heirs publicly acknowledge their past oversights before any final distributions could be executed. Silence filled the room. None of them could evade the gravity of their choices. Martha watched quietly from the corner, her eyes reflecting a mixture of relief and sorrow. She understood that the true inheritance was not wealth, but reconciliation, delayed, painful, and ultimately transformative. I leaned back, letting the weight of the documents settle. The family's reactions, their confessions, their willingness, or reluctance to confront past failures would now determine the fate of the Harper estate. For decades, the will had waited. Now, finally, the reckoning had begun. The next morning, I arrived at the Harper estate while the fog still lingered thick along the cliffs, and the house seemed suspended between time and memory. Today, the final reckoning would occur. The will had been found too late, yes, but now it demanded action. It demanded truth. And I, Gabriel Ward, was the executor, the arbiter between legacy and accountability. I set the documents carefully on the oak desk. The original will, supplementary letters, moral contingencies, photographs, and Martha's meticulous notes detailing the family's past omissions. Each sheet carried weight, each paragraph bore consequence. I knew the family's reactions would shape not only their inheritance, but their relationships, some possibly irreparably. Jonathan Harper was the first to enter the room. His composure seemed intact at first, but I could sense the subtle tremor in his hands, the slight tension in his shoulders. He scanned the desk, eyes lingering on the will and letters, and I could see his mind racing, plotting, fearing, reasoning. "Gabriel," he said cautiously, "I assume you've read all the documents thoroughly." "I have," I replied, "and it's clear what your father intended, but I must warn you. Executing the will as it was originally written requires honesty, acknowledgement, and ethical reflection from each heir." He swallowed, his jaw tight. "And if someone refuses?" "The will allows no room for selective obedience," I said. "Your father was deliberate. Every stipulation is binding, contingent upon confronting the past. This is not merely property, it is accountability. The consequences of delay, of inaction, of dishonesty are now unavoidable." Jonathan's face paled slightly, and he glanced toward the corner where Clara and Thomas would join. I sensed his fear, not for wealth alone, but for exposure. The moral dimension of the will loomed over him. Clara Harper entered next, calm but resolute. Her eyes met mine, and there was a quiet understanding. She was prepared to face the past, to speak truth. Thomas followed, feigning casual indifference. Yet his hands betrayed subtle signs of anxiety as he adjusted his tie and ran a finger along the edge of the desk. I gestured toward the documents. "Before any distributions can occur, each of you must acknowledge, in writing, the actions you took or failed to take that impacted the estate. Each confession will be recorded and will determine your rightful inheritance." A silence settled over the room. It was not the polite silence of a routine legal proceeding, but a weighty pause filled with tension, anticipation, and the stirrings of long-suppressed guilt. Jonathan spoke first, voice tight and clipped. "Fine. I admit that I withheld information about several transactions to protect my own share. I thought I was acting in the family's best interest." I nodded slowly. "Acknowledgement is the first step. Continue with the specifics." He detailed the manipulations, the letters he ignored, the financial adjustments he made without informing his siblings. Each confession chipped away at the carefully constructed facade of authority he had maintained for decades. Clara followed. I knew about some of these omissions," she admitted, "and I did nothing. I stayed silent out of fear, loyalty, or maybe self-preservation. I cannot undo the past, but I acknowledge it now." Her voice wavered, but strengthened with each word. Finally, Thomas stepped forward. He hesitated, as if measuring the truth against his desire for indifference. I wasn't directly involved, but my inaction allowed wrongs to continue. I thought it wasn't my place, that the adults would handle it. I see now that my silence contributed to the problem. I watched each confession, noting the subtle expressions, the relief mingled with shame, the fragile steps toward reconciliation. Each acknowledgement fulfilled the conditions set by their father decades ago, now finally enforced. With the confessions recorded, I began the process of implementing the will's stipulations. Property was redistributed, bank accounts were reconciled according to the original allocations, and the moral contingencies, the delayed bequests, were executed. It was a painstaking process, but the family watched, absorbed by the weight of truth and the unfolding consequences of past actions. Martha stood quietly at the edge of the room. Her eyes glistened as she observed the transformation. She had known the family longer than anyone and understood that the late patriarch's instructions were as much about restoring integrity as distributing wealth. Once the redistributions were complete, I paused to reflect aloud. This estate is more than land, cash, or valuables. It is a testament to the importance of honesty, accountability, and moral courage. The consequences of delay, the too late, were mitigated only by your willingness to confront the truth today. Jonathan, Clara, and Thomas absorbed my words in silence. I could see the shifting dynamics. Jonathan's authority tempered by humility, Clara's compassion strengthened by honesty, and Thomas's detachment replaced by responsibility. Slowly, the family's posture softened. They were no longer merely heirs. They were participants in the reckoning their father had orchestrated. Later, as I left the Harper estate, I felt the weight of my role settle into my shoulders. Executors often think of themselves as mere legal administrators, arbiters of wealth. But today, I realized that inheritance is not only about property. It is about history, truth, and accountability. It is about ensuring that the decisions of the past are faced honestly in the present. The will had been found too late, yes, but perhaps it was found at precisely the right time. The family would carry forward the lessons of confession, reconciliation, and accountability. And I, Gabriel Ward, had been the custodian of both their wealth and their moral reckoning. Inheritance is never just about property. It is about truth. It is about confronting mistakes. It is about allowing the weight of legacy to teach, correct, and illuminate the paths of those who remain. As I walked down the fog-laden path toward the cliffs, the sea below whispered against the rocks. The house behind me stood silent, its secrets finally partially unveiled. For the Harper family, the consequences of past delays had been harsh, but ultimately transformative. The will, found too late, had done its work, and I had done mine.
Thank you for watching this story until the end. If you found it meaningful, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell icon so you never miss an update. Your support helps us continue bringing powerful, real stories from around the world.